proud to welcome and to host Sachil Singh from University of York in Toronto in Canada. So Sachil is an assistant professor of physical culture and health technologies in datafied societies. So his main research interests are in medical sociology, surveillance, algorithmic bias, and race. And so he's a sociologist and is going to talk about very important aspects that are at the crossroad of technology and social issues in social technical systems that we are all working on. And I just also want to mention that he's a co-editor of one of the major interdisciplinary journals, which is Big Data and Society. So it's a real pleasure and opportunity for us, Sachil, to have you here. Everyone is welcome to the talk. Just a quick reminder of the organization. So there will be the talk, then there will be a short Q&A session, and then there will be a roundtable, a panel session where we'll have colleagues from the university with Sachil extending the discussion on some aspects that Sachil touched upon. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucille, very much for the introduction. Thank you for hosting me. And many thanks to you and your colleagues for all the work that you've done to put this together. I really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have you here. So today I am talking about datafication in healthcare, and I'm primarily going to be focusing on the crossroads of racial discrimination and the implementation of algorithms in the health sector. Before I get to that though, just some background for you. This is where I'm coming to you from. My office is just behind that building, behind the pretty building. I am situated in the Faculty of Health at York University. I'm a sociologist by training, and the work that I do primarily focuses on social harms, algorithmic bias, and surveillance. So I'm sitting at the intersection between examinations of social discrimination and technological advancement. I'm very interested in the ways in which it's increasingly challenging for law, ethics, philosophy, a number of social sciences to keep pace with the rapid advancements in technology. Is that okay? So as a point of entry, I want to show you two brief videos which kind of set the stage for a number of the topics I'll be talking about today. So I'll show them to you and then we'll talk about them afterwards.
Oh, Desi. This is using the video tracking software.
All right.
Explain.
My coworker Wanda and I are sitting in front of an HP Media Smart computer. State-of-the-art computer, wouldn't you say?
I'd say.
We're using the face tracking software, so it's supposed to follow me as I move. I'm black. I think my blackness is interfering with the computer's ability to follow me. As you can see, I do this, no following. Not really following me. I back up, I get really, really close to try to let the camera recognize me, not happening. Now, my white coworker, Wanda, is about to slide in the frame. You will immediately see what I'm talking about. Wanda, if you would, please.
Sure.
Now, as you can see, the camera is panning to show Wanda's face. It's following her around. But as soon as my blackness enters the frame, which I will sneak into the frame. I'm sneaking in, I'm in there.
That's it. It's
And
over.
there we go. It stopped. My hands are here. Wanda, please get back in the frame. Get back in. As soon as white Wanda appears, the camera moves. Black Desi gets in there. Oh, nope. No face recognition anymore, buddy. I'm going on record, and I'm saying it. Hewlett-Packard computers are racist. I said it. Hey, hold on. And the worst part is, I bought one for Christmas. I hope my wife doesn't see this YouTube video, but I bought the same computer, and we can't even use. Look, it's not following me. It's not. Wanda, get back in the frame.
It follows me wherever I go.
I welcome responses to why the HP webcam does not pick up Negroes.
Okay, so this HP webcam evidently is having difficulty detecting Black Desi, as he calls himself in this video, while it has no problem adjusting to white Wanda. In response to this, HP said, the technology we use is built on standard algorithms. You can tell me what that means. I don't know what a standard algorithm is. That measures the difference in intensity of contrast between the eyes and the upper cheek and nose. Essentially, for Black Desi, there is insufficient contrast between his face and the background. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. I want to show you one more video along the same lines.
All right, so watch this. Black hand, nothing. Larry, go. Black hand, nothing. Larry, go. Racist mother sinks.
So just about 2 hours ago, when I arrived on this campus, I went to the washroom, I washed my hands, I needed paper towel, and there was a sensor which had a picture of the hand. And I placed my hand and it wasn't working for me. So that came to mind also when I thought about this particular clip. So again, we see the system operating successfully for the white individual, but not for the Black individual. So in both cases, the technologies were not designed to be racist, yet they have real consequences for racialized individuals. In both frames, Blackness interrupts the functioning of the technology. When we put this into conceptual terms, the technologies are designed to identify motion and faces and then classify or make decisions about who gets attention and who does not. In other words, who is included and at whose expense. So with the work that I do, I ponder a number of questions like, what are the racial outcomes of algorithms? Are there accountability mechanisms in place when the design of algorithms is black boxed due to its proprietary design? I want to know what happens when the legislation is not able to keep pace with technological advances. Who benefits when algorithms are racialized, such as in these two cases? So these are the types of questions I grapple with. Now, Sophia Noble, who a few of you may be familiar with, believes that inherent bias of being male and white necessarily causes algorithmic harms. So I want to understand the stories of the people behind the algorithms, specifically in healthcare. But I first want to establish this within the context of Noble. So what we're told here by Safia Noble is that if Google software engineers are not responsible for the design of their algorithms, then who is? So this is a rhetorical framing. It's essentially saying the designers of the systems are the ones we need to turn to. They are the ones who are to be accountable. If we apply this to the two videos I showed you, it's saying the designers of the HP camera are the ones who are to be accountable. The designers of the soap dispenser are the ones to be accountable, right? That's the framing here. She goes on, by rendering people of color as non-technical, the domain of technology belongs to whites and reinforces problematic conceptions of African Americans. So this is my primary point of entry into the talk for today. I want to understand if it is indeed the case that the designers, the engineers, are the ones we should be turning to and saying, hey, you've done something wrong here. You are the one who has to fix this because you've created this problem. Or is there something else that's going on? Does it mean we simply have to change the face of the designer? According to that first quote, that's the answer. You change the skin color of the designer, and that will help to overcome the problem. So I'm in the process of conducting interviews with data scientists. I'll be emailing you after the session, to understand their perspectives. Very often the critique from the social sciences doesn't actually engage with these people. Rather, it examines the consequences and says, the consequences are discriminatory, therefore, the designer is at fault. But I want to be very precise in who should take this blame and on the ways forward. So I'm applying all that I've told you so far to the domain of healthcare. I want to look at algorithms in health systems that are embedded with forms of social discrimination. The same question exists. Who do we point fingers to, and how do we find ways forward? So I want to know, what are the pros and the cons of algorithms in healthcare? Are the racist outcomes of algorithmic design intentional? Who benefits from this bias and at whose expense? Why would data scientists design algorithms to be biased in the first place? And what can we glean from the collection of race data in understanding algorithmic design? So these are the key questions that will guide how we proceed in my time with you this afternoon. And if we are to identify two key themes, I think you can tell from the questions that I've got here, the two key themes that influence the work that I do are algorithms and race. So that's where our primary focus is going to be. Now, a good point to begin is looking at the main perceived benefits of AI in healthcare. Some of the key benefits that are often identified are that they improve patient outcomes and they reduce costs. They fundamentally are able to reduce costs because you no longer have people being paid to manually sort or create hard copy systems. You've now got these automated systems that can do it for them. So there are great efficiencies, both in terms of time and money. AI is able to support physicians in offering care to patients. So the idea is that it improves the care provided to patients. It's able to personalize the care provided to patients. So no longer is a patient just treated as a mass, but a patient can now be the recipient of tailored, customized care thanks to AI. And another key benefit in the literature is that it can allow, it can operate independently of physicians, particularly with machine learning in areas of radiology and anatomical pathology. So a recent study coming out of the US has identified that AI is able to identify the race of a patient based on X-rays alone. Benefits of this could be assisting a medical staff with detecting illnesses that affect patients simply from the X-rays. But what they also found is that the algorithm is more likely to miss signs of illness in Black patients. And this was peculiar to them. They didn't understand why this was. The concern with this is that algorithms might unintentionally generate a racial bias towards Black patients. So let's just go back a slide. In trying to understand how it is that these algorithms are able to detect a patient's race, what the team did was they fed the algorithm a number of X-rays and said, this is the X-ray of a Black patient. This is the X-ray of an Asian patient, and so on. They uploaded thousands of these X-rays. And from that information, the tool was able to go forward and independently determine the race of a patient simply from the X-ray. And so to this day, nobody knows why. So this is an ongoing project coming out of Massachusetts, where this team is trying to understand how this works. It's exceptionally anxiety-provoking, given that we don't know the answer to this. We don't know why it is that the algorithm is able to detect race when it's simply an X-ray. Equally, there are a number of concerns with the racial biases in healthcare. So a few common examples are the ones that I have on the screen here. The American Heart Association Get With the Guidelines Heart Failure Score categorizes Black patients at a lower risk of death than non-Black patients. The EGFR, that's the second one I have here, it predicts patients' kidney functions with higher EGFR values assigned to Black patients because of the view that Black patients are more muscular. The vaginal birth after cesarean algorithm predicts that African American and Hispanic folks are more likely to be unsuccessful in labor if they previously underwent a cesarean section. In other words, based simply on the race of the patient, these are the conclusions that are drawn. The Stone score predicts that Black patients are less likely to experience flank pain related to kidney stones. So if we keep a noble in mind from a few screens ago where I had those quotes up, it seems that healthcare algorithms are indeed discriminatory. And they are discriminatory, if we are to extend her thought, because of the designers, right? Their particular social positioning is the cause? So as a critical scholar, I say, okay, perhaps, but let's dig into this a bit deeper. So I'm currently conducting collaborative empirical work with a colleague, Stephanie Teeple at UPenn. She's a medical doctor / PhD student. And we want to examine Noble's idea that data scientists are solely to blame. And to do this, we are interviewing data scientists employed by or for hospitals. So people who are parts of teams that design any kind of algorithm supposedly to reduce costs, improve efficiencies at the hospitals. What we are finding in our ongoing interviews is that most of the respondents who speak to us are concerned with people off the curve. What do I mean by that? Well, randomized clinical trials are often regarded as the gold standard, right? But they are incredibly expensive. So how do you make them less expensive? You make the patient population more homogeneous. And when you make the patient population more homogeneous, you see less variance. But if you exclude the variance, then you are excluding most of the patients who would go to hospital, right? And so that's why those patients who would go to hospital are the ones who are primarily off the curve. So by and large, the data scientists we spoke to are concerned with those on the fringes. They want to know what it is that is affecting the lives of these individuals who are not reflected in the randomized trials. We want to understand the social postures, the backgrounds, the influences that brought data scientists to the positions that they currently hold. So are they inherently evil people that some of the literature portrays them as? What's going on here? So I've just got a few excerpts from the interviews for you here. The first one, as a member of the Muslim community, we have a strong ethic around volunteerism. This participant, this data scientist, was telling me this because I was pushing at questions about where he gets his values from that influence the work that he does. So he was pointing to his religion and his involvement in the community as inspiring him to have an intimate interest with people off the curve. Another person told me, I want to improve patient outcomes and hospital efficiency. I want to make a difference. So again, there's a sincerity here. Someone else, working in Rwanda opened my eyes to disparities in access to resources. So again, expanding one's perspectives influenced the work that this individual currently does. Another respondent, even though my intentions may have been in the right place, there are still ways that even work such as mine can undermine progress towards equity or can perpetuate systems of power imbalance, such as the fact that I am a white person in Canada modeling HIV epidemics in Eswatini, that's Southern Africa. Why would that happen, as opposed to a modeler from Eswatini being able to do that? So I've only recently started to make progress towards collaborating more directly and trying to empower people in Eswatini. They should be the ones who people turn to understand the epidemic in Eswatini, not me. So again, there's a humility that's coming out here, right? Another respondent, I'll be honest, it was up until I had gone to India. Many of the research mentors that I would have had in my training here in Canada were largely white men. And then I went to India. The person who became my eventual master's and PhD supervisor was one of the few women who was involved in a mathematical epidemiology. So again, different perspectives, social experiences are influencing the work that these data scientists are involved in. Now, not all the data scientists I spoke to gave me a sense of this sincerity and this humility and this passion. Some are quite stuck up. One made for a really uncomfortable interview with being emotionless when I was trying to understand his passions and his backgrounds. He just kind of spat out at me, I do the work I do because that's my job. Why else would I be here? And when you're in an interview with someone, it can be quite unsettling. But this was the only interview I spoke to who did not have that kind of humility or that kind of social story as the others had. So just based on the sample of interviews that I've shared with you so far, we can see something. That by and large, the social identity and cultural upbringing of data scientists influence the logic of the algorithms they design. So already we get a sense that there's perhaps more to the story than Noble is telling us, right? Those quotes I had at the beginning, which is to say, the designer is the one we need to go after, right? Another key aspect of these interviews is the complexity of the data politics at play. So one of the interviewees told me a story. And he's part of a team at a hospital in Toronto. And his team was approached by cardiologists at the hospital. And the cardiologist said, we need you to design us an algorithm that can identify which patients in our hospital are not on anticoagulants. In other words, to thin the blood, right? And so this team of designers said, why do we need to do this? And the cardiologist said, because the research we have done at this university shows us that we do not have a strong enough sense of who is on anticoagulants and who is not. We need this data. And so, because the cardiologist asked this, the team said, sure, we'll design an algorithm that will effectively be able to assess every patient in the whole hospital and identify who is on this and who is not. Fine. So they designed it. They were proud of the work that they did. They implemented it. And as soon as they implemented it, they started getting notes from internists saying, what's going on here? Why is there this algorithm trying to understand who is on anticoagulants and who is not? And so the team said, well, the cardiologist said we should design it. And the internist said, you listen to the cardiologist? You should have come to us. We are the internists. We deal with the patients. We know who is on anticoagulants and who is not. And so there was this back and forth. And so what it pointed to was the failure of conversations between different parties at the hospital. The reason the cardiologists were believed by the data scientists is arguably because of the social standing that cardiology has, right? After they sat down and had a conversation, they came to the realization that the data the cardiologists had was skewed because they skewed the data for purposes of their publications. It was not reflective exactly of the data in the hospital. And that data was held by the internists. So had the team gone to the internists, perhaps brought in the cardiologist for a conversation, things could have been different. So what this points to is a complexity. It's not simply the person designing the algorithm. There's a lot of politics at play. There's tensions, there's interactions and engagements behind the scenes that go into the design of these tools. One respondent said, the side benefit that I see has nothing to do with AI. It's getting people to talk to each other, to realize they need change in their processes. It's not just about the AI solution. It's about how humans work together, change their processes. That's just simply ignited by the discussion of AI. So again, we get a sense here. Is that me? No, it's not me. So we get a sense here of AI being the catalyst for these conversations, if implemented in a socially responsible way. The impact of race and gender in data science also came up in the interviews. One respondent said, my doctoral supervisor in data science is a woman of color and a relatively small in stature. And I think that plays a role in the dynamics of conversations, even in things like the meetings we're part of. She would have thoughts and she'd have thoughts that she'd mention, and then they would be parroted by some man, a white man at the meeting, and then people would start to listen. So again, we see gender, we see race at play. Again, aspects that we don't get a clear sense on unless we look at the complexities, the behind the scenes of data science. So another key theme, preliminary theme, because as I say, these interviews are ongoing. I'm just sharing with you where we are so far. There are many complex socio-political parts to algorithmic design. It's not black and white. It's not straightforward. It certainly is not simple. It's more complicated than simply blaming data scientists for their decisions. Data scientists might take orders from people higher up in their organization. So their individual agency or responsibility in their designs is not simply on their own shoulders. It could be in some cases, but we cannot assume that, right? So keeping in mind what I've presented to you so far, how do we move towards the socially just design of healthcare algorithms? What do we need to do? Well, for Noble, it's changing the demographics of the designer. But this expects data scientists to have expertise in social science. This is an unfair criticism because they are the engineers of algorithms with no expectation of social awareness. As a sociologist, I'm not critiqued for not having a background in the science involved in the design of algorithms. And so it's the same thing. So this speaks to the need for interdisciplinary collaboration, where you can have folks from engineering, you can have folks from the social sciences, law, and so on, being involved in the design, where each group brings their expertise to the table and they can go about business that way. So this speaks to an intellectual and policy gap that could be filled with collaboration. Now, some also say that we need to include vectors such as race data, because this will take us a long way towards social justice. I've got my concerns with this, and I'll tell you why in a few moments. So firstly, those who say we need a race data in the design of algorithms argue it because race data promotes good medicine. Dr. Mackenzie is the CEO of a nonprofit group in Toronto involved in a research and policy work to improve healthcare. He argues, and other colleagues, that race data is essential because it helps us understand how communities are affected by illnesses and medical conditions. The podium is falling apart. There we go. So that's the argument. We need this data because then we can understand the racialized experiences. But think about this. To have race data assumes that it can be measured. How brown must somebody be to be classified as brown? We have to quantify this then, don't we? What happens if someone who is visibly brown has a black grandmother? What impact does that have on the racial classification of that individual? Do we now need categories to differentiate one group from another? The last time I encountered this type of classification was under apartheid South Africa, where we had clear boundaries between a racial category and another one. So an intentional focus on race would demand the need to have these kinds of boundaries. When we collect race data in healthcare, it implies the racial surveillance of patients. Is this the path that we want to pursue? And so I draw on the literature from surveillance to understand this. The definition of surveillance that I use is the focused, systematic, and the routine attention to personal details for the purposes of influence, management, protection, or direction. So we can note from this definition that surveillance is not always inherently good or bad. But if we talk about the surveillance of race data, then we also talk about the sorting of that data so that people are racially sorted. And this brings us to another term, surveillance as social sorting. This is focused on the social and economic categories and the computer codes by which personal data is organized with a view to influencing and managing people and populations. So if we talk about the race data that might inform algorithms in healthcare, then I've got a few concerns. I have three primary concerns, in fact. The first one, race is a social construct and not a biological one, which means that it's fluid. The way that somebody self-identifies on one day could be different to how they self-identify on a different day. Do we want to return to apartheid South Africa, where we've got those kinds of systems of formally defining, differentiating the racial boundaries between different groups? My view is that this collection of a race data promotes bad medicine. I want to briefly offer some examples from the COVID pandemic to explain why I believe it promotes bad data. Sorry, bad medicine. So in May 2020, the single largest COVID outbreak in all of North America took place at the Cargill meat processing plant in Alberta, Canada. The first case was confirmed on April the 6th of 2020. nearly half the workforce, over 1,000 staff, tested positive with COVID. And this also led to the spread of the virus amongst hundreds of family members. Investigative journalists exposed the working conditions at Cargill. The main issues were working elbow to elbow. They used change rooms with insufficient physical distancing. Employers expected asymptomatic employees to be on the floor, busy at work, even while they were awaiting COVID test results, and so on. Now, the workers at Cargill are primarily Filipino. So those interested in race data and the collection of that data say race is a social determinant of health. We want to know how marginalized Filipinos are affected by COVID. Yes, it's true. A number of Filipinos were affected, and that fuels the cause for this data. But the cautionary line is that not all Filipinos work at meat processing plants. If we are to reduce a virus to its interpreted racial tones, that could run the risk of racialized communities not seeking the appropriate healthcare that they need, or it could even promote racism. In fact, the attention to a race following this outbreak contributed to xenophobia in Alberta, where Filipinos were denied entry to some banks and supermarkets simply because they were Filipino. That's my concern with the collection of race data for such purposes, or more broadly in healthcare. So against this backdrop, there were moves in Canada to include such data in the development of contact tracing apps and immigration apps that any visitor to the country would have to use when crossing the border. But the argument is that it perpetuates stereotypes. So if a race informs health data that informs healthcare algorithms, then it can contribute to discriminatory patient outcomes of underdiagnosis and overdiagnosis. Underdiagnosis, because if you are not treating the patient in front of you, but you're going simply by a set of statistics, then that's inappropriate patient care. It could contribute to overdiagnosis because just because the patient who enters your office is Filipino, you immediately assume that they've got condition A, and so on. The racial stereotypes become more clear. So as I draw this talk to an end, where I am in the research that I'm currently doing with these interviews that I was talking about, it's showing that algorithmic bias is complex and requires a number of solutions. Critics of data science, and data scientists in particular, should proceed with greater care. Because as we can see, these factors are shaped by a number of social variables. Collaboration is one solution to addressing this. And thirdly, racial hierarchies are amplified when the race of a patient is encoded in healthcare algorithms. I want to share with you one quote that I think helps get us to a better place. Automated systems are not inherently neutral. They reflect the priorities, preferences, and prejudices, the coded gaze of those who have the power to mold artificial intelligence. And as we know, it's sometimes those with the most power who do the least to address systems of bias. I'll end on that note. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Sachil. Do we have questions in the audience or online?
We have something online. Is that from earlier on? Oh, it is. That's from 4:13.
Yeah, it's just one.
Okay.
We have questions up there. Does it work? It works? Yeah.
So thank you. So thanks for your presentation. So I have actually a couple of questions. So first one, on the first part, you mentioned actually the biases of engineers could actually be translated into their algorithms. So first one, actually more positive question. So actually, is it really the case that algorithms are designed by a single engineer? Is it not usually a team of engineers? So can we expect to have like at least some diversity in the group of people working on algorithm? And second part, more, let's say, normative ideally. So would it be, if you just involve different engineers or you just ask them to discuss together, do you think it could produce better outcomes because they just become aware of possible biases, so you just have something more diverse, so it could be a solution?
So I think diversity in any context is a good thing, right? So that's the simple answer to the question. But the more complicated answer is simply by changing the race of designers to make it more cosmopolitan, does that actually improve the outcomes? My argument is not necessarily. We can't assume that a patient of a particular race has had the same social experiences as another person who looks the same, right? So I'm pushing both for diversity of social vectors of discrimination, like a race, gender, class, and so on, as well as diversity of perspectives. So diversity of perspectives in the design of the algorithms means pulling in sociologists, philosophers, the lawyers, economists, and so on, so that we can get to a position that reduces the blind spots that are embedded into these systems. Was there another part that I didn't answer? Yes. Right, yeah. That's a good question. So I think one of the easiest ways to do it is to begin at research-affiliated hospitals. So in a number of contexts, there are hospitals that are affiliated with the School of Medicine at the university. And that provides a clear bridge between academia and the medical setting, because employees of the university would have an easy way in. And so it would be incumbent upon those at the top of the hospital to pull in people from these different categories, right? So I think it's not as a utopian a vision as it possibly sounds. I think these are small but very practical and doable steps, especially in the starting points of a research-affiliated hospital.
Any other question? You're the last.
Thank you very much for your very stimulating presentation. I have just two questions. The first one is that you are talking about algorithmic design, and I have the book of Florian Jaton in mind, who said that algorithmic design is a process, and you have different steps in algorithmic design. So do you take this issue into consideration to understand how bias and discrimination enter into this process? It is my first question. And the second one maybe is a question of clarification. What are the relationships in your work, in your reflection, between bias, racial bias, and discrimination?
Great questions. Thank you so much. So the first question, yes, absolutely. Algorithmic design has a number of steps and processes at play. And that's been considered in, can I just help you if you don't mind, just to see why this power is not working? That's why I opened the question. This power to the laptop. That's been part of the interviews where I'm trying to understand the initial step, how the conceptualization of designing an algorithm takes place. And then what is step 2 and who is called into the table? And then what's step 3 and what's step 4 and how is it implemented? And at each of those steps, we see, at least so far from the interviews, that there are different contexts where we have bias creeping in. What is helpful is that the more of these steps we have, in some cases, the more people come to the conversation. And that at least helps to have conversations about some of the blind spots, but not always, because very often it's like-minded people who are brought in to have these conversations. And so the blind spots are still there. But absolutely, in the work I do, I don't just consider an algorithm as something that's created in a single step, but that there are a number of agents at play. So this project is just the initial step in trying to understand the world of data science from a sociologist's point of view. Because as I say, very often, sociologists in particular are critical of data science. And I feel that it's a very, I think it's bad sociology. I think it's not a careful sociology, and that's what this project is trying to do, trying to understand those processes. The second question, yes, bias and discrimination are linked, but are also quite distinct. We can think of discrimination as being the implementation of bias, or we can think of discrimination as being an outcome of bias. One could have bias, but if part of a team, which comes back to the first question, if part of a team, it might not make its way into the system that's designed, and discrimination could be reduced. So yes, two interconnected terms, but I think slightly different. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sachil. So I suggest now we move to the panel session with our other guests. So Sachil, you will be part of the panel session if you want to sit there. So that our local colleagues.
Shall I close this?
Ah, yes, you can close it. I will prepare. Maybe you can stay on Zoom, and I will just move your laptop so that we have the camera in front of the speakers.
Sure. Can I actually, I don't know why it's saying, I'll let you figure that out. Thank you.
So let me very quickly introduce our panelists following Sachil's talk. So thank you, Sachil, for such a nice talk on such important problems. So we have with us Anne Vima, So, Anne, you will introduce yourself, but I may just say that you are a full professor here at Université Côte d'Azur, working in the sports science department called the STAPS in French. And you are an expert in public health related to sports. And you are also the vice president in charge of the doctoral education and training at Université Côte d'Azur. So welcome in this session, Anne. And then we have Valentina Tirloni. So Valentina is an associate professor also here at the university in information and communication science, working in the philosophy lab. And Valentina is teaching in the DS4H curriculum, so the digital system for human graduate school. And you're also very interested in all aspects of algorithmic governance. So I suggest we start with you, maybe reacting to some aspects that Sachil mentioned during his talk. The idea here is to have different disciplinary perspectives on this very wide matter. Maybe we can start with you, Anne, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe you are saying to add that, but for me, it's a question of trust and confidence and ethics and innovation. Some people maybe more trained and more experience in this area, but for me, IA is not a problem. So the problem is how we consider all the cycle of production of the algorithm. So even the user are involved, the engineers, scientists, and so on. And sometimes industry want to sell their algorithm. So I think it was also a question about the commercial aspect of that algorithm. And the second thing, when you finish your presentation, I said, but is the problem of inclusion of data and patients rather than entering the notion of race, for example, in the algorithm? You say it's not, maybe not, we should not integrate race in the algorithm, but it raises the question of inclusion of patient and collection of data without entering the notion of race or other kind of social vector. But we have a responsibility in the collection of data and the inclusion of patients, because it seems that sometimes IAR is trained with former patients, and the patients evolve, and you have different type of patients, and you have an intra-variability in patients. So I think there is also a responsibility to be sure that the data you collect and the data you use to train IA so for me, it's also to come back to a sort of ethical of research. I don't know if it's we can discuss about that, but this is the two major points. And I'm mostly involved in public health, and it seems that what you presented is more focused on healthcare, which is one part of health. And I think that your presentation could be applied to several topics, because the problem of social determinants are everywhere, and it's conditioned everything. So I think it's a good example in health, but it's maybe also applied to other topics. And In public health, we have not so much use of IA, or it's quite new with the COVID-19 pandemic. Maybe it's for, but mainly for predictive model and for surveillance. So there is kind of use of IA conduct policy decision. So this is another aspect, because all what you say also, it has consequences on the decision we will take to organize the health system. So I think there is major consequences if we train with bad data or not complete. So there is a question for me on that. And in the literature, we saw also paper on quantification of uncertainty to be more confident in the algorithm. So, but it seems that it's an area of research, how to estimate the degree of confidence of the algorithm. Maybe it could help also. I don't know if you have some experience in such quantification of uncertainty, because it seems that healthcare professionals are, for some of them, skeptical about generalize the use of IA in clinical setting. And it seems that it needs some kind of other indicator rather than the one that can help them to decide about the diagnosis or about the treatment, the degree of trust or confidence or the quantification of uncertainty. But it seems it's also a complex problem to have this kind of indicator. So I think the major for me, talking about AA, I'm not an expert in AA, but I'm more and I'm interested to see how it is implemented in public health. I think we come back to ethical and problem and reflection and to regulation. And if we are looking at the European level, the WHO Europe published several booklets on that, on ethics and regulation about IA in health. We are all aware of the importance of IA and how it may help us, but I think we are also afraid about what we can do with that if we have no ethics and no regulation. And I think this is a major debate, in addition to more methodological and technical problems that we can have with other methodology, probably. Because I think in research, you have different kind of methods, we can discuss about the method. And for me, another major discussion and point of attention is about the accumulation of error. Because when you implement data in IA, even when we have a survey, only when you have a questionnaire and you ask for something, you can have some error, or if device, for example, measure physical activity. There is a lot of debate about that, because it was my previous research on how to measure physical activity. And some people are saying, okay, we should need accelerometer because it's an objective device. I like this reaction. What is an objective device? In the device, you have some algorithm also to calculate indicators, and these algorithms are entered by humans. So there are some choices. So, and I think if people are trust IA without trying to understand how it works, it's the same problem with several devices, the black box. We don't see, we don't know, so it's okay. I need something to measure physical activity. I use an accelerometer. I don't know what is in. And sometimes with the industry, they can't give you the algorithm because of competition and commercial aspects. So I think for me, it's a major point of discussion. So maybe I can stop there, not take too much time. I don't know if you want to react or.
Or
Yeah, thank you so much. If I understood you correctly, there is not a lot that we disagree on so far. I fully agree, humans are the problem. I do also want to be cautious because when we look at the kind of machine learning that takes place, we see the increasing autonomy of the machines from humans. So yes, humans are at the core, but I don't want us to think that it stops with humans.
Yeah.
Right? I think we also have to look a bit broader because of the technological turn that we are experiencing currently. But absolutely, yes, I agree. On the inclusion of data and race, the main reason I'm being cautious about the inclusion of race is I want to avoid stereotyping and prejudices. So I'm not approaching this from a right-wing perspective of saying, I don't want to vote for that reason. It's coming from a social justice point of view, right? For me, to use race as a variable in a healthcare algorithm is to assume that race is biological. But for me, it's a social variable. It's not a biological trait. And that's one of the main portions that I put out there. So,
because it reacts to another.
Everything else you said, I fully agree with you. The other factor with race. Can I have 1 minute? I recently completed a project where I studied an app on a phone that is widespread globally, used by physicians. It's called UpToDate. It's a widespread app. Dynamed is a competitor, but it does the same thing. So you go into a physician's office and you've got symptoms, you've got a cough and a fever and something else. And the doctor has an idea of what's wrong with you, but they're not so sure. They can take off their smartphone, open the app, and type in your symptoms. And the app will suggest what it is that you might have. In the report that the app gives you is the inclusion of the racial groups most susceptible to those conditions. So race is embedded there. And then there is a citation for where that information came from. So in my previous study, I went to the citation to see what it was that they said about race and who did they cite. And I went to who they cited. So I did a whole citation trail to see how it ended up in the app. I tried to see all the different studies cited along the way. And there was such a breakdown. In all the cases, the conclusions were different. They were misquoted, but then it ends up in the app that the doctor uses. So if we are to use race in that kind of a context, then I think that's a huge problem.
No, just because we say that race is more necessary concept, but I want to talk about age and agency, because it's also a problem, and we saw literature on that regarding RA, and it could be also, and it's also social, but also biological. I don't know if you have experience with the age as a variable to use in algorithm.
I don't have research experience on that, but I've been on committees examining doctoral students' work on that. And all I can comment on, based on what I've been exposed to, is the extent of prejudice that's embedded into these systems, where aging is determined as being, aging is assumed to mean elderly, dysfunctional, and so on, right? So we've got these prejudices that are embedded. And so I think it does raise the need for greater attention to such variables in this context, because I don't think it's being given the attention that it needs.
I had just another example, bad example, which is also some wrong or insufficient data. I don't know if you heard about the experience in Oklahoma to predict crime with predict poll, I think, by the truth, and it seemed that it targeted more minority, black minority electors. So because the tool was trained, or the system was trained with discriminant data. So my point is, how can we, take more attention about inclusion of data, because I think it's a major point of discussion in mind. It's how to include and have different data. And regarding the race, for me, it's not a problem because it's in the algorithm, except if we have different, a large sample of people with a diversity of people, to ensure that the diversity of the population are included. Because otherwise we will see a kind of data, a kind of people, and then the system will work, but it will not be able to apply to the population as you showed.
I'm not familiar with that Oklahoma example, but I am familiar with similar systems in policing designed to try and predict crime. The problem, though, is just because this individual is Black or Latino, the risk is higher that they will go down the road and steal someone's handbag.
But it is true in the streets. So if the police come, they will also probably more easy arrest a Black than white.
Absolutely. Yes.
Maybe I suggest we go fast.
It was very nice. Thank you so much, Lucille, for organizing this seminar, because it's important to make cross examinations on those topics, because they concern every one of us in whatever field, whatever research field we are in. I think as a citizens, we are really concerned by what you said. Thank you so much, Sachil, for your talk. I've got so many questions, and also to Anne as well. Maybe I would start for the simplest one. I would just jump on the last remark made about race. I'm not a specialist in on those kind of studies, so I do precise this. But I used to teach intercultural communication, and race maybe is also a cultural concept, not just biological in the wrong way, or social. It's also a cultural concept. Dealing with the idea of otherness. If we do not accept the other and otherness in general, racism is always there, because it's very hard to deal with diversity, because it gets us out of our comfort zone. So it's a kind of natural defense, which is very dangerous. I do agree on this. As a philosopher, I would actually make a few comments on your talk that impressed me a lot, especially the two videos were very shocking for me. because we are used to understand that all these technological biases are there, but if a not white man cannot wash his hands, this is quite disturbing for me. It's very hard to accept that this technical bias is quite dangerous. So the first comment I would say is that maybe my students are aware that I'm quite critical, because I like to apply critical thinking to those topics. So this is just my job. And I think that actually what you said is under the main category of techniques is never neutral. And this is a quite good example. We think that actually a means is just an objective as device, as Anne said, but a means is never neutral because it has been designed to reach a purpose. So the aim, the goal, the final output is already in the mind of the engineer or of the programmer. And so I think that those examples in algorithm as well show that techniques is always a political tool. And what you want to realize through a means is a political program. So I think that when we discuss about techniques, we should consider techniques not just as a simple social and cultural process, as many authors have said already, but also as a political mean. If you have an aim, you design, you ask for the tool reaching this goal. The example you said about cardiologists asking for an algorithm, that was quite clear. They wanted to know a specific population inside the hospital with a specific medical treatment. So this is very clear. And actually, the main problem is not that you need this information, but maybe that you can use the same information for other medical studies. So, and actually, even if we express an immediate consent about that treatment, actually, we have no insurance on the way those data will be used in the future. And this is a legal and also ethical problem, because it deals with my freedoms, it deals with my privacy. So it's a kind of problem. So if techniques is never neutral, I would say that as philosopher, computer science was so useful and helpful in resolving ethical problems. Let me explain. In the past, we used to say that a means is always neutral. So it's the fault user if actually the tool becomes, let's say, wrong from an ethical point of view. Think about a knife. This knife can cut a carrot or kill someone. So in the past, from an ethical point of view, we used to say it's on the user's responsibility to investigate if this knife is a good or a bad means. But with algorithms and computer sciences, it's perfect, because actually we cannot have an algorithm which is neutral. I mean, it would be a bug. An algorithm is made to produce an output. So the outcome, if the algorithm is not producing an outcome, it's just going, working and bugging. If the aim has not been designed. And this is very nice, because with those algorithms, it's not anymore the user's responsibility. Actually, as a user, and I am a user, I love technology in general, but I'm not responsible of those means, because I haven't participated in the decision-making process before programming. So that's why maybe philosopher or social sciences could be helpful also before designing an application, an algorithm, or everything that deals with computer science. If we ask maybe to, before programming, maybe the good question would be, what are the collateral effects? What are the secondary aims that application or that algorithm can produce? Your example on anticoagulant is very nice, because it can, sorry, I'm thinking about the effects of vaccine on the anticoagulant and so on. So maybe it's useful if you treat, I don't know, inside population in a hospital to understand, I don't know, how many pills you need and so on. But we actually have no possibility to understand or to know if those data are used also for other treatments or other medical studies. So thank you so much for this, because somehow as a philosopher, I like to stress on the fact that we are not anymore the responsible users, are not anymore only the responsible people in those technical words, because actually we cannot, as a simple citizen, we cannot participate in the technical design. We can still participate in a democratic process where we actually try to orient policies, but as Anne said before, the economical part of those problems related to medicine are very huge. We know actually how health can also be a business. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, not much to disagree with. I think we're on the same page, which is great. Just two things. The first one, can you clarify when you say race is cultural?
Yeah.
What you mean? Because I'm wondering if it's, yeah, if you could just clarify what you mean by it.
Okay. It's cultural, meaning that actually you can see race as the main category to whom not a community, a kind of human being can belong. So they share also cultural aspects. Maybe we can better understand the idea of race as a cultural concept when we think about racism, because it's and if we think about the way people have to integrate themselves, we see that we have different procedures. We have the ghettoization, which is the fact that actually you do not want to integrate at all because you prefer to stay within your own cultural community. On the other extreme position, you have it hopefully integration, which is the fact that you can share your own cultural codes and also the cultural codes of the host community. I mean, I'm Italian, and I know that without being schizophrenic, I can handle with the French code system and the Italian code system. So I think this is a good example of integration, because I can be, let's say, comfortable with the two cultural systems, and I'm not just talking about languages, French or Italian. It's something more complicated as the idea of culture is. There are so many possible definitions of culture. When I say that race and racism is a cultural concept, it means that actually it's about the dynamics you can use dealing with otherness. In that sense.
Okay, thank you. So you mean that racism is cultural? Because for me, I would disagree that race is cultural. I would say that if ethnicity is cultural, the languages, the practices, behaviors, and so on. But to say race is cultural, I would disagree with. It might assume that someone who is brown and who lives in Canada could relate in some respects to someone who is brown and lives in India. But I would say we have very different customs, systems of operation, and so on. So I would say yes to ethnicity, but not to race. I think there is a lot more diversity in cultural practice within a race group.
Absolutely. This is perfect as well.
Okay. So yes, I would say racism is cultural.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say race is cultural. I would say that ethnicity is cultural.
Yeah, maybe we cannot just think that race is related to the color of the skin in that sense. Yes. Okay, because you made the example of brown living in Canada and the brown living in I don't like to use this color to talk about people. It's very disgusting. Sorry, that you use it. Yeah. So I just said the brown example. Yeah, because actually it's there is a culture. In the past, I do remember as Italian, we have a kind of racism between northern people and southern people, and we are all right. So there is actually racism is not as cultural concept, is not related to the skin color. Yeah, but go back to these important topics on algorithm applied to techniques. Thank you. Because I actually what I want to ask you is, as you perfectly said, racial data are supposed to improve good medicine, and I do agree with you that they are just, in my opinion, there to target people and target consumers as well, and to say if you are black or if you are brown or if you are green, you should take this treatment because whatever. Okay, so I do agree on this aspect. I think also that there is a kind of general policy in collecting all this data, and this maybe I would be even stronger than just applying critical thinking, saying that actually I think this is a part of the problem, threatening democracy as well, because all the data given for those studies are given by us. If you have a smart watch, if you have an application, actually you send information about yourself. I mean, I have no smart watch, and I try to protect my personal data, even if I have nothing to hide. But this is this regards only myself. I mean, it's a kind of freedom, liberty, kind of protection of my personal life. So the political aspects of all this data collection and also mining, because when you have so many data, I mean, it would be such a pity not to mine other possible data.
Then please jump in here from a data point of view. So you spoke a lot about essentially the variable of race in the data collection, in the data that you studied in North America and in France. And I think it's the same in Italy. There is no collecting of race data. So that means that race is not even something that is considered. So that's true for the US system, maybe the Canadian system, but absolutely no collection of racial aspects. So you can have the address, you can have a number of things in the data, but there is no categorizing, there is no quantization, so discretization over kind of spectrum. There is absolutely no collection of the aspects, they are prohibited. And I just wanted to add this aspect, because we were talking about collection and how data is used, but it's also very dependent on the geography, on the place, culture of whether data is here. And when data is not here, because we're mentioning all these drawbacks of having the data related to race in the analysis. So there are two main questions. First, if we do not have this data in this variable in the data, then how can we quantitatively investigate the prejudices that are creating people in the? That's the first question. And the second question is, in societies like us, where we do not have valuable data on race, how do we go from a sociologist's point of view to investigate the impact of algorithm in a specific context of these countries where we do not have this kind of data?
Thank you so much. So, I'll just comment on one point from what Interesting. And that's to do with the example of the smartphone. Or, and you said you don't have one of the outline the decisions for that, and it's your freedom.
Unless to buy.
Sure, right? But I also think about the next person who has a smartphone and the extent to which they provided informed consent when they bought the one. Did they know what the data was going to be used for, right? Because then we can't assume that they got the same freedom if there's no informed consent. And that ties into these questions also, even of race data, where in some cases where such data are collected, there is no informed consent provided by the patient. And that's a big question.
Maybe 5 years ago, nowadays, you know that when you buy a connected device, you know that actually you are connected through different bridges, through different, I mean, someone buying, I don't want to quote brands, but if you have something that can to which you can speak and ask, please tell me how is the temperature outside, you know that that object, you know what I mean, is connected. So if it's connected toward the outside, it means also that someone else can get into your flats, let's say. So I think maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, people weren't aware enough about these points. But nowadays, I think that when you buy a connected device, you know, or maybe if you do not want to know, it's because you do not want to realize that you prefer not to understand, which is also understandable, even if I don't agree absolutely. But you know that if you want to dig a bit deeper, you can also ask what are the collateral effects of it. It's what I said before. Maybe this tool is very helpful if you want to know the temperature outside, but you should ask what are the secondary aims of these objects.
I agree that's true in many cases that people are aware, but I don't think we can assume that either.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why we do this seminar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Receive your question. It's next. It's one that's kept me awake at night for so many nights. When I make the argument that we must not look at race data, am I digging myself into a hole where I'm unable to answer questions such as that one? And I've come to the place, this brings us back to the discussion earlier, where we have a distinction between race and racism. So how do we study prejudices in the algorithms? We can study racism from it. What are the outcomes of the data? That's separate from saying we need race data or we don't need it as the input, right? So I don't think my argument gets me into a place of saying we cannot study prejudices. I'm also not saying that we shouldn't do that. Of course, we need to be studying prejudices, and I do believe we can still study the ways in which it takes place if we have the conceptual distinction between these two terms, and we approach them as such. Yes?
So another question, I think we are also getting toward the end. Can you all hear me? Okay. Maybe stand up to involve the audience as well. So I'm an economist, which means that I will do now some obnoxious comment and mathematical one. I'm joking. So thank you very much for the talk and then the intervention. Actually, my question, my consideration goes into what we said, because in the end, you somehow outlined what we will call a trade-off. Like, so we need data in order to improve prediction, to improve the way in which we provide. But the very collection of the data, the segmentation, is very subject to being exploited, feeding rates, and so on. On the one hand, we need information. On the other hand, this more information can be misused in different ways. While on the one hand, I really appreciate the motivation for your study, which is I want to lift a bit of pressure from the data scientists, or as sociologists, I want to understand what goes on there. But this, I think, is very important and very new. I think it's also, we always pay a little bit on the past content, on the how do we solve this trade-off, or is there a way to solve the trade-off? Solution, but one thing I always think about is that we have a little bit of a fallacy of being scientists, in which we try from an engineering viewpoint to design the best way, like where should I position myself, like should I raise data but not enough or not, or put some safeguard. We always have the option to pick patient, the user, so like, would you like, would you not like? And on that, I agree very much with you that we cannot assume consent, but we can ask consent. And which brings to the last point, which is, there is a lot of scope for regulation, which is also what Anne was mentioning. So here is not only data scientists, the users, is data validators, is the companies themselves, is the managers in the companies. So there is a lot of layers in which we can act, also make suggestions. And the other point, more the extreme point, is that we can also impose bans. So we talk about predictive policing, which is like, okay, that could lead to a bad outcome. Let's not do it. So that is something that we can say, so the AI acting, you can't now, or you will not be able to use AI algorithms to identify people with face recognition. But this is also something which is a society we can take a stand. So that's more of a comment. We designed the roundtable so that you would more or less agree. No, but so that's that's what. No, the real question is that while I see the point of studying that in the context of AI, and even though my position is on AI, AI pays the salary. The point is that how different is that from any other, let's say, technology that is not neutral, or equipment that is used to provide services, digital and non-digital. And if it is not so new, what can we learn from what has been very done in the And that's all for me.
One argument. Yes. Thank you very much for the comments and those questions. So almost like the contradiction that you identified, I think it can be approached by saying we need better strategies to ensure the more appropriate and more careful collection of data, the management of the data, the storage of the data, the implementation of the data. So for me, that addresses the seeming contradiction, where I think we are not doing enough of those things. Why are we not doing enough of it? Because of what we said. The regulation is all but absent. So that's one part of the interviews that I did. talk about today, where part of the interviews is asking these data scientists about the kinds of regulation that's involved in the design and implementation of their tools. In all cases, the answer was there is no regulation. And so that's a concern. Not only because it can bring about the types of problems I highlighted, but a host of other problems too. So I think regulation, I agree, it's paramount, but we don't have it. That then also gets us into another set of questioning, which is this problem of technological advances outpacing the ability to ensure adequate protections. And that's a gap that we need to do more to reduce. It might mean slowing down on the implementation of these tools so that the protections can appropriately catch up. Your other question about how new is all of this. So, yes, algorithms are not new. We know that. They go back centuries, right? I am of the view that with the technologies that we implement, there are a lot of commonalities with technologies that have come before. The core concept that's consistent was brought up earlier, that there is no neutrality. We know that, regardless of the type of tool that you are using. But I think at the same time, we should also be looking at what it is that is new at the current time. What are the new challenges that you're facing? And even if we are to just look at the ability of a physician in real time, consultation with patients, to make a decision that is done with the assistance of AI, I think that's quite different to what was possible before, or even the ability of AI to autonomously make decisions about patient treatment. So those types of things are new. And so I think it's important for us to consider both. Yes, a lot is the same, but we must not allow that to overshadow the uniqueness of the moment.
Thank you very much. So, unless you have a concluding remark, we can conclude the session. Do you have any concluding remark?
No, I just wonder, do we have an idea of the proportion of people that are also current? When we are talking about that, about yeah, 50%. And there's a fair. Do we know? Do we have an idea?
I mean, that's a problem. When you look at that college,
This is more a question than a comment. My last question.
Thank you. And maybe my conclusion is let's try to collaborate much on these fields. I think we should see the main objective from different perspectives, from different know-how. So it's important to share as much as we can, for us, for our responsibility, for our users, and for our citizens as well. Thank you. Last word,
I think it's opportunities such as this one that allow us to engage to bring attention to those off the curve. How do we make the invisible visible in a caring way, right? And my concluding remark is the same, it stole my line, which is collaboration. Groups such as this are what it's all about. We need interdisciplinary collaboration. The moment we start to believe that our own discipline can solve the problems is the beginning of the end. That is intellectual arrogance. I would be the first to say, as a sociologist, I'm only able to contribute a small piece of the puzzle. I need people from other disciplines at the same table so that we can collectively try and solve these problems.
Yes, and I would add, we need the people don't agree with us, because actually the four of us are absolutely, we do agree. So we need people who don't agree with us just to move further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one heads up. So in September, when we start again the VOILA sessions, we have as a guest Ben Green, who's a associate professor in applied math, working in the University of Wisconsin, just graduated from Harvard. And he works exactly in a team of science of study of techniques and SDS. Studies and he just wrote a book on algorithmic diagram. And this book, the very book, is exactly another question that we have today on how to be actually run in society, the very research that made in the database books. And I think that would be that we continue the conversation with that and so I would like to ask Sachil for sharing with us such opening aspects from sociology, also and just to tell you that there are researchers downstairs, so don't hesitate to go by and have a visit. And see you in the next session, which will be on 6 to be online. Thank you very much.